Rashid Al Mansour, a reclusive billionaire who trusts no one, is pretending to sleep while secretly testing the honesty of his maid's young daughter. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Today's special shout-out goes to Charbear1868. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Also, let me tell you something funny. Someone actually bet that I can't reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year, and honestly, I want to prove them wrong. So if you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and join the family. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is a very personal goal for me, and your support would mean the world to me. Thank you for believing in me and being part of this journey. And before you go, drop your name and location in the comments. I'd love to give you a special shout-out in my next video. Rashid's life is a monument to wealth and a mausoleum of loneliness. At 72, he has amassed a fortune that could feed nations, yet he sits alone in a mansion where silence echoes louder than laughter ever did. Betrayed by business partners who smiled while signing contracts that ruined him temporarily, abandoned by relatives who measured their affection in inheritance percentages, and deceived by staff who pocketed silver spoons they thought he wouldn't miss, Rashid has learned that trust is a luxury more expensive than any diamond in his vault. Today, during a storm that batters the tall windows of his estate, he has designed what he considers the ultimate test. On his mahogany desk, clearly visible, sits a thick envelope stuffed with cash and a rare pink diamond pendant worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. The targets of his experiment? Amara, his maid of 3 years, and more specifically, her 10-year-old daughter, Layla. Rashid expects them to fail. He wants them to fail, because in failure, he will find validation for the walls he's built around his heart. The tension is immediate and suffocating. Will his cynical assumptions about human greed hold true, or will this child, innocent, poor, and supposedly unaware of his watchful eyes, shatter everything he believes about the nature of mankind? But there's something else beneath Rashid's test, something he won't admit even to himself. A desperate, dying hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he's been wrong all along. The storm had been building since dawn. By early afternoon, it unleashed its full fury upon the Al Mansour estate, a sprawling mansion perched on the hills overlooking the city like a fortress of glass and stone. Rain hammered against the windows in relentless sheets, turning the manicured gardens into a blur of green and gray. Wind shrieked through the eaves, rattling shutters that hadn't been properly secured, creating a symphony of creaks and groans that made the mansion feel alive, or perhaps haunted. Inside, the silence was almost oppressive. Despite its grandeur, marble floors that gleamed like frozen lakes, Persian rugs that cost more than luxury cars, crystal chandeliers that sparkled even in dim light, the mansion felt cold, lifeless. The kind of place where footsteps echoed too long and shadows stretched too far. In his private study on the second floor, Rashid Al Mansour sat motionless in a high-backed leather armchair, positioned at an angle that allowed him to observe the entire room without appearing to do so. To any casual observer, he appeared to be napping, eyes closed, head tilted slightly back, hands resting on the armrests with the practiced stillness of someone accustomed to conserving energy. His tailored dark suit, custom-made from Italian wool, hung perfectly on his thin frame. Gray hair, meticulously combed, caught the muted light from the desk lamp. His face, lined with decades of suspicion and disappointment, remained eerily calm. But Rashid was not sleeping. Behind closed eyelids, his mind worked with the precision of a chess master plotting moves ahead. His breathing remained deliberately slow and steady, a performance perfected over years of boardroom negotiations where showing weakness meant losing millions. On the desk before him, carefully arranged, sat his bait. A manila envelope, unsealed, with the corner of crisp $100 bills visible, at least $20,000 in cash. Beside it, catching what little light filtered through the storm-darkened windows, lay a pink diamond pendant on a platinum chain. The diamond, a rare 15-carat stone he'd acquired at auction in Geneva, glowed with an inner fire that seemed almost alive. Together, these items represented more money than Amara, his maid, would earn in 5 years of loyal service. Rashid had positioned them deliberately. Not hidden, but not ostentatiously displayed either. Placed as if he'd been reviewing them before his nap, as if they'd simply been left out through carelessness or exhaustion. The perfect temptation. The perfect test. Let's see, he thought, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. Let's see what people are really made of when they think no one is watching. His mind drifted, as it often did these days, to the long catalogue of betrayals that had shaped his worldview. His brother, Khalid, who'd embezzled from their first business venture and then had the audacity to demand his fair share at their father's funeral. His ex-wife, Nadia, who'd married him for the lifestyle and left him for a younger man the moment the prenuptial agreement terms matured. His own children, 2 sons and a daughter, who called only when they needed money, who visited only during holidays with forced smiles and calculating eyes, already measuring the mansion and tallying their inheritance. Then there were the business partners who'd leaked proprietary information to competitors. The personal assistant who'd sold stories to tabloids. The financial advisor who'd recommended investments he was secretly profiting from. The chef who'd been caught photographing family documents. The chauffeur who'd attempted to blackmail him over a fabricated scandal. Single. Each betrayal had added another brick to the wall around Rashid's heart, until he'd become what he was now, a man who trusted no one, who viewed every interaction through a lens of suspicion, who believed that beneath every smile lurked greed, beneath every kindness hid calculation. Everyone has a price, he'd concluded years ago. The only question is whether you're willing to pay it to discover what that price is. The storm intensified outside, a flash of lightning illuminating the study in stark white light, followed seconds later by thunder that shook the windows. Rashid didn't flinch. He'd weathered worse storms, the kind that came in boardrooms and courtrooms, that arrived in the form of hostile takeovers and family lawsuits. A soft knock at the study door pulled him from his reverie. "Mr. Al-Mansour?" Amara's voice, hesitant and respectful, filtered through the heavy oak. "Sir, I apologize for disturbing you, but may I have a word?" Rashid waited a beat, 2 beats, then 3, before responding in a voice carefully modulated to sound drowsy. "Enter." The door opened slowly, and Amara stepped inside. She was a woman in her mid-30s, though life had worn her in ways that made her seem older. Her uniform, a simple gray dress and white apron, was spotless, pressed with the care of someone who couldn't afford to make mistakes. Dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, eyes that held both weariness and determination, hands that bore the evidence of years spent cleaning, cooking, and caring for others. She kept her gaze lowered respectfully, standing just inside the doorway. "Sir, I'm terribly sorry, but the school has closed due to the storm. The flooding on the main roads, they've sent the children home early. I have no one to watch Layla, and I cannot leave my duties here incomplete." She paused, anxiety tightening her voice. "Would it be acceptable if I brought her here? I promise she won't disturb you. She's a good girl, very quiet. She can sit in the kitchen or the—" "Fine." Rashid cut her off, waving a hand dismissively, keeping his eyes half closed as if the conversation was barely worth waking for. "But ensure she doesn't touch anything. This house contains items worth more than—" He stopped himself, the cruelty of the comparison too obvious even for him. "Just keep her out of trouble." Relief flooded Amara's features. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I'll fetch her immediately. She won't be any trouble at all, I promise." She backed out of the room, closing the door with the soft click of someone trained not to make noise. Rashid allowed himself a small, bitter smile. Perfect. The pieces were falling into place exactly as he'd planned. A child, perhaps 10 years old from what he recalled, brought unexpectedly into a house full of treasures. What better test could there be? Children were supposed to be innocent, after all. Supposedly pure. If greed existed even in a child, especially one raised in poverty, then it would confirm everything Rashid believed about human nature. He adjusted his position slightly in the chair, ensuring his view of the desk remained unobstructed while maintaining the illusion of sleep. The envelope sat there, so carelessly placed. The diamond caught another flash of lightning, throwing prismatic colors across the mahogany surface. Come on, he thought darkly. Show me what you're really made of. Show me that I'm right about people. That even a child, given the opportunity, will choose greed over honor. 20 minutes passed. The storm showed no signs of abating. Rain continued its assault on the windows, creating a rhythmic percussion that might have been soothing under different circumstances. Rashid remained perfectly still, his breathing measured, his posture relaxed. He'd trained himself to wait, a skill honed during hostile negotiations and tense boardroom standoffs. Patience was a weapon, and he wielded it expertly. He heard them before he saw them. Soft footsteps in the hallway, Amara's low voice giving instructions. Remember what I told you, Layla? Stay quiet. Don't touch anything. Mr. Al-Mansour is very particular about his belongings. If you need me, I'll be in the East Wing finishing the upstairs bedrooms. You can sit in the library, there are books there, old ones, but you can look at the pictures. Yes, Mama. A child's voice, small and tentative. I'll be good, I promise. I know you will, Habibti. You're always good. The footsteps receded, Amara returning to her duties. Then silence. Rashid waited, every sense heightened despite his closed eyes. He could almost feel the child's presence in the hallway, the curiosity that must be overwhelming in a house so unlike anything she'd known. More footsteps, lighter now. Hesitant. Growing closer. The study door, which Amara had left slightly ajar, creaked open a fraction more. Rashid controlled his breathing, kept his features neutral. Through the tiniest slit of his eyelids, he watched. A small figure appeared in the doorway. Layla. She was slight for 10, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders, expressive brown eyes that took in everything with a mixture of wonder and caution. Her clothes, a faded blue dress and worn sandals, were clean but clearly secondhand, mended in places where fabric had torn. She clutched a small backpack to her chest like a shield. She stood frozen in the doorway, clearly aware she shouldn't be there but drawn by childish curiosity. Her gaze swept the study, the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, the antique globe in the corner, the paintings in ornate frames, and finally, the man in the chair. Rashid felt her eyes on him. He remained perfectly still, the consummate actor in his own drama. Layla bit her lip, a gesture of internal debate playing out on her young face. Then, slowly, carefully, she stepped inside. Her feet made almost no sound on the thick carpet. She moved like a child who'd learned early in life to be invisible, to not draw attention, to navigate adult spaces without causing disruption. Here we go, Rashid thought, his pulse quickening despite himself. This is it. The moment of truth. Layla moved further into the room, her eyes wide with wonder at the opulence surrounding her. She reached out tentatively toward a crystal paperweight on a side table, then pulled her hand back, remembering her mother's warning. She looked at the paintings, at the books, at everything with the absorbed fascination of a child discovering a new world. And then she saw the desk. Her gaze fixed on the envelope, the visible cash, the glittering diamond pendant that seemed to capture and multiply every bit of available light. She froze, her small body going completely still. Rashid watched through slitted eyes, his heartbeat loud in his own ears. There it is. The temptation. Let's see what you do now, little girl. Let's see if you're different from everyone else who's come into my life with empty hands and hungry eyes. The test had begun. And Rashid Al-Mansour, billionaire, cynic, and architect of his own loneliness, waited to have his darkest beliefs about humanity confirmed. The storm raged on outside, but inside the study, the real storm, the one that would change everything, was just beginning to build. Layla stood motionless before the desk, her small frame silhouetted against the storm-darkened window. Lightning flashed, casting her shadow long across the Persian rug, and for a moment, she looked like a wraith, ethereal, uncertain, caught between worlds. Rashid watched through the barest slits of his eyelids, every muscle in his body coiled with anticipation. His heart hammered against his ribs with a force that surprised him. After all these years, after all the betrayals he'd witnessed, why should this moment feel different? Why should the actions of one poor child matter? Because children are supposed to be innocent, he thought bitterly. If even a child proves me right, then there's no hope left. None at all. The envelope sat there on the desk's edge, almost carelessly placed, the cash visible enough to tempt anyone. $20,000. To Layla and her mother, that was probably more money than they'd see in years. The diamond pendant glittered beside it, catching the lamplight and throwing tiny rainbows across the mahogany surface. Together, they represented a life-changing sum. An escape from poverty. An opportunity that might never come again. Layla took another step closer. Then another. Rashid's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Here it comes. The reaching hand. The furtive glance. The moment when innocence reveals itself to be just another mask for greed. But Layla didn't reach for the money. Instead, she tilted her head, studying the desk with the same careful attention she'd given everything else in the room. Her fingers twisted the strap of her backpack nervously. She seemed to be having some internal debate, her young face scrunched in concentration. The storm intensified outside. Wind howled through the eaves, and rain battered the windows with renewed violence. Thunder rolled across the sky, long and low, making the chandelier tinkle softly above them. Then Layla did something unexpected. She looked at Rashid. Not at the money. Not at the diamond. At him. Her brow furrowed with concern. She took a step closer to his chair, abandoning her interest in the desk entirely. Her eyes, those expressive brown eyes, studied his face with an intensity that made Rashid's breath catch. What is she doing? Layla bit her lip again, then moved even closer. She was near enough now that Rashid could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, nervous but determined. Close enough that he caught the scent of cheap soap and rain from her damp hair. "Señor," she whispered, so softly he almost didn't hear it over the storm. Then, seeming to remember where she was, she switched to hesitant English. "Sir? You're cold?" What? Rashid's mind reeled. Of all the scenarios he'd imagined, this wasn't one of them. She thought he was cold? She was concerned about him? He realized then that he was cold. The study, despite its grandeur, had always been drafty. The storm had brought a chill that seeped through the old windows, and his hands, those frail, elderly hands resting on the armrests, had begun to tremble slightly. Not from fear or anticipation, but from the simple physical reality of being 72 years old in a cold room. He'd been so focused on his test, so absorbed in watching for theft, that he hadn't noticed his own discomfort. But this child had. Layla looked around the study, searching for something. Her gaze landed on a throw blanket draped over a distant chair, but it was too far away, across the room. She looked back at Rashid, at his trembling hands, at his thin frame in the leather chair. Then, with the swift decisiveness of a child who'd made up her mind, she shrugged off her own jacket. "No," Rashid thought, his internal voice sharp with disbelief. "Well, you can't be." But she was. Layla carefully, gently draped her small, worn jacket over Rashid's knees. It was a pitiful thing, faded denim, patched at the elbows, threadbare at the seams. It probably provided little warmth even to her. But she laid it over him as carefully as if it were made of silk, tucking the edges around his legs with the tender concern of a grandchild caring for an ailing elder. Rashid's eyes, still feigning sleep, burned. His throat constricted. His carefully controlled breathing threatened to hitch. This isn't possible. This doesn't happen. People don't, children don't. But even that wasn't the end of it. As Layla stepped back from his chair, her foot accidentally brushed against the desk leg. The envelope, already precariously positioned at the edge, slid forward. The diamond pendant, its chain tangled with some papers, followed. Both items tumbled toward the floor in what seemed like slow motion. Rashid's heart stopped. Now she'll take them. She'll pick them up and slip them into her backpack. She'll look around to make sure no one sees. This is the moment. This is when greed wins. Layla gasped softly and dropped to her knees, catching the envelope before it hit the carpet. The pendant landed with a soft clink beside her. She gathered both items quickly, her small hands moving with careful precision. Rashid waited for her to look around furtively, to check if he was still sleeping, to make her move. But Layla did no such thing. Instead, she stood up, climbed onto the chair position before the desk and carefully, so carefully, placed both the envelope and the pendant back where they'd been. She arranged them just as they'd been before, perhaps even more neatly, ensuring the cash was fully tucked into the envelope, positioning the diamond pendant so its chain wouldn't tangle again. She even picked up a pen that had rolled when the items fell, replacing it exactly parallel to the desk's edge. Then she climbed down from the chair, adjusted it back to its original position, and stood there for a moment, hands clasped in front of her, looking at Rashid one more time with those concerned eyes. "Sleep well, sir," she whispered in her accented English. "You must be very tired." And then she turned and walked out of the study, pulling the door closed behind her with barely a sound. Rashid sat frozen in his chair. Completely, utterly frozen. His mind, sharpened by decades of suspicious calculation, struggled to process what had just happened. Every instinct, every lesson learned from a lifetime of betrayals, screamed that this couldn't be real. People didn't act this way. Children didn't act this way. There had to be an angle, a trick, a con he wasn't seeing. She left the money. She left the diamond. She covered me with her own jacket, her only jacket, and she left everything. His hands, those trembling hands she'd been concerned about, now shook for an entirely different reason. The wall around his heart, that impenetrable fortress built brick by brick through years of disappointment, cracked. Just a hairline fracture, barely noticeable, but there nonetheless. No, he told himself fiercely. This proves nothing. It's a fluke. An anomaly. She was probably too frightened to steal, too aware that I might be watching. Or perhaps she didn't understand the value of what she saw. Yes, that must be it. She's just a child. She doesn't comprehend. But even as he constructed these rationalizations, another part of him, a part he'd thought long dead, whispered a different truth. She saw you were cold, and she helped you. She saw valuable things falling, and she protected them. Not because she feared punishment. Not because she wanted reward. But because it was simply the right thing to do. Rashid opened his eyes fully, staring at the jacket draped across his knees. It weighed almost nothing. It would provide no real warmth. Yet it felt heavier than anything he'd ever carried, weighted with an implication he wasn't ready to accept. What if I've been wrong? What if all these years? The study door burst open. "Layla!" Amara's voice, sharp with panic, shattered the moment. "Layla, where are?" She froze in the doorway, taking in the scene, her employer, supposedly napping, now clearly awake. Her daughter's jacket draped over his knees. The envelope and diamond pendant on the desk, visible and accessible. The color drained from Amara's face. Her eyes went wide with horror, jumping from the jacket to the valuables to her daughter, who stood in the hallway just behind her. "Mr. Almansur, her voice cracked. "Sir, please, I can explain." She didn't mean any, she wouldn't have. Amara rushed forward, snatching the jacket from Rashid's knees, her hands trembling. "I am so sorry, sir. So terribly sorry. She should never have disturbed you. She knows better than to enter your study. Please, I will ensure." "Mamti, no." Layla's small voice, confused and frightened. "He was cold. His hands were shaking, and I didn't know where else to." The fear in Amara's eyes was raw and real. She believed she was about to lose everything because her daughter had committed the grave sin of showing kindness. Rashid looked at them, mother and daughter, and saw not potential thieves but two people who'd learned to expect the worst, who believed that every act of humanity would be punished, who lived in constant fear of losing the little they had. He saw himself reflected in their fear. And for the first time in decades, he felt ashamed. "She took nothing," Rashid heard himself say, his voice rougher than intended. He cleared his throat. "Your daughter, she was concerned I was cold. She placed her jacket over my knees. Then she secured some items that had fallen from the desk. She behaved." He struggled with the word, so unfamiliar in this context. "Honorably." Amara stared at him, disbelief warring with hope on her face. "Sir, you may return to your duties," Rashid continued, unable to meet her eyes. "And you may tell your daughter that." He paused, swallowing against the unexpected tightness in his throat. That her concern was noted and appreciated. Amara's relief was palpable. She clutched Layla's jacket to her chest, nodding rapidly. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It won't happen again. I promise it won't." "See that it doesn't." The coldness in his voice was automatic, a shield raised before he could examine why he needed protecting. Mother and daughter retreated, Amara pulling Layla along with whispered admonitions in Arabic. The door closed, and Rashid was alone again with his thoughts and the storm. He looked at the envelope on his desk, the diamond pendant, the empty chair across from him. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Rashid Al-Mansour didn't know what to think. The test was supposed to have confirmed everything he believed. Instead, it had shaken the very foundations of his worldview. One act of kindness proves nothing, he told himself firmly. It's an outlier, a statistical anomaly. I need more data, more tests. But even as he plotted his next move, that crack in the wall around his heart widened just a fraction more. Outside, the storm began, finally, to ease. 3 days passed, but Rashid found no peace. He sat in his study each afternoon, ostensibly reviewing financial reports or conducting business calls, but his mind kept circling back to that stormy afternoon. To the worn jacket draped over his knees. To small hands carefully replacing valuables that could have changed a life. To eyes that had looked at him with concern rather than calculation. It means nothing, he told himself repeatedly. One act doesn't define a person. I've seen people perform kindness when it costs them nothing, only to reveal their true nature when the stakes are higher. But the doubt persisted, gnawing at the certainty he'd built over decades. His own children had called twice during those 3 days. Once from his daughter Samira in London, asking about an advance on her trust fund for essential renovations to her townhouse, and once from his son Khalil in Dubai, who'd somehow accumulated gambling debts that required immediate paternal intervention. Neither had asked how he was. Neither had noticed the unusual strain in his voice. The contrast haunted him. On the 3rd day, as afternoon light filtered through clouds still heavy from recent rains, Rashid made a decision. He needed to know. Not just suspect, not just wonder, but know with absolute certainty whether Layla's kindness had been genuine or merely the performance of a clever child who understood how to manipulate a wealthy old man. He would conduct another test. More challenging this time. More revealing. The plan formed in his mind with the same meticulous precision he'd once applied to hostile takeovers. He would stage an accident, something that would appear to cause significant damage to something valuable. Then he would observe how mother and daughter reacted when faced with potential consequences. Would they try to hide the damage? Blame each other? Or would their integrity hold even when threatened with punishment? Rashid stood from his chair, his joints protesting the movement, and walked to the doorway. He could hear sounds from deeper in the mansion, Amara's footsteps on the marble floors, the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner, the soft murmur of her voice as she spoke to Layla, who'd been permitted to accompany her mother again. He descended the grand staircase, one hand on the mahogany banister, his footsteps deliberate. The hallway opened into a vast space that had once hosted diplomatic dinners and charity galas, back when he'd still believed in such performances. Now it served as little more than a showcase for his wealth, priceless paintings on the walls, sculptures on marble pedestals, and in the center, his prized possession, the Persian rug. It was a masterpiece from the 19th century, hand-knotted by artisans from Isfahan, featuring intricate floral patterns in deep crimsons, sapphire blues, and gold that seemed to glow with inner light. Rashid had acquired it at auction for $700,000, outbidding a museum in the process. Its value wasn't merely monetary. Rugs like this were irreplaceable, each not a testament to craftsmanship that no longer existed in the modern world. Perfect for his purposes. Rashid moved to his study's small attached washroom and filled a crystal glass with water. His hands trembled slightly as he carried it back. Not from age this time, but from something else. Anticipation? Anxiety? He wasn't certain anymore. He positioned himself near the rug's edge and waited. Footsteps approached. Amara appeared at the far end of the hallway, carrying cleaning supplies, Layla trailing behind her with a small dustpan and brush. When Amara saw Rashid standing there, she immediately straightened, her expression shifting to one of cautious deference. "Mr. Al-Mansour. We were just finishing the West Wing. Did you need something, sir?" No. Rashid kept his voice neutral. Continue your work. Amara nodded and turned to instruct Layla to help with a nearby table. As they moved past him, Rashid executed his plan. He stumbled, a performance but one aided by genuine unsteadiness, and let the glass slip from his fingers. Water splashed across the Persian rug's intricate border, darkening the crimson threads, spreading in an irregular stain that looked far worse than it actually was. No! Rashid's roar echoed through the hallway, loud enough to make both Amara and Layla jump. He infused his voice with fury he didn't feel, channeling decades of boardroom intimidation. Look what this rug is priceless. Absolutely priceless. Do you have any idea what you've done? Amara went white. Sir, we weren't anywhere near. Your presence distracted me. Rashid continued the performance, gesturing wildly at the water stain. This rug is worth more than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes. This water, if it sets, the dyes could run, the foundation could weaken. This is irreparable damage. It wasn't, of course. Water on a properly maintained Persian rug required only careful blotting and drying. But Amara didn't know that. She stared at the stain with the horror of someone watching their entire world collapse. Sir, please her voice broke. I'll pay for it. I'll work without salary, however long it takes. Please, just don't. You. Rashid scoffed, maintaining his cruel facade even as guilt twisted his stomach. You couldn't pay for this in 3 lifetimes. This rug came from Isfahan in 1842. It survived wars, revolutions, and 2 centuries of history. And now it's ruined because of... Wait! The small voice cut through his tirade. Layla had stepped forward, positioning herself between Rashid and her mother. Her small frame trembled, but her chin lifted with defiance born of desperation. It wasn't Mama's fault, Layla said, her English careful and measured despite her fear. It was an accident. You said so yourself, you stumbled. Please don't punish her for something that wasn't her fault. Rashid stared at the child. 10 years old, wearing clothes that had been mended multiple times, facing down a man whose wealth could destroy her family with a single phone call. Yet here she stood, defending her mother. An accident still has consequences, Rashid said, his voice lower now but still harsh. This rug must be repaired, professionally cleaned. The cost will be enormous. Who will pay for that? Layla's hands moved to her neck. She wore a thin chain there, something Rashid hadn't noticed during their first encounter. With trembling fingers, she unclasped it and held it out. In her small palm lay a locket. It was old, handcrafted from what appeared to be silver, though tarnished with age. The surface bore delicate engravings, flowers and geometric patterns that spoke of careful, loving work. It opened on a tiny hinge, revealing space for 2 photographs, though both compartments were empty now. This was my grandmother's, Layla whispered. Mama says it's the only thing we have from her. From before. She stopped, swallowed hard. It's old. It might be worth something. Please take it. For the rug. Just don't fire Mama. Please. The hallway fell silent except for the soft tick of a distant grandfather clock. Rashid stared at the locket in Layla's outstretched hand. It was worth perhaps $50 in melt value, maybe $100 to a collector of vintage jewelry. A pittance. Less than nothing compared to the rug's supposed damage. The child had to know this. Yet she offered it anyway, her most precious possession, her only connection to a grandmother she'd never met, offered it as readily as if it actually could make a difference. Layla, no. Amara gasped, reaching for her daughter. Not the locket. Habibti, you can't. That's all we have of Taita. It's okay, Mama. Tears streamed down Layla's cheeks now, but her hand remained steady, the locket still extended toward Rashid. Taita would understand. She'd want to help. Something inside Rashid shattered. Not cracked this time. Shattered completely. He stood there, looking at this child who just offered her entire inheritance, meager as it was, to protect her mother from consequences that weren't even her fault. Offered it knowing it wasn't enough, knowing it would barely make a dent in the imagined debt, but offering it anyway because it was all she had to give. When was the last time anyone had sacrificed anything for him? When was the last time anyone had offered him something they cherished, not because they wanted something in return, but simply because they thought it was right? His own children wouldn't give him the time of day without calculating what they'd gain from the interaction. His ex-wife had taken millions in the divorce and still sent him hostile emails demanding more. His business associates treated generosity as weakness and kindness as an opening for exploitation. But this child, this poor, powerless child, stood ready to give everything. "Keep your locket," Rashid said quietly. Layla blinked, confusion replacing fear. But the rug. "You said—" "I lied." The admission felt like pulling glass from an old wound. "The water won't damage the rug. It's already drying, and even if it wasn't, such rugs are woven to withstand far worse." He paused, struggling with words he hadn't spoken in decades. "I wanted to see what you would do. How you would react." Understanding dawned in Amara's eyes, followed swiftly by anger, quickly suppressed but visible nonetheless. "You tested us?" "Yes." Rashid met her gaze steadily. "And you passed. Both of you. Your daughter especially." He turned his attention back to Layla, who still held the locket, now clutched to her chest rather than extended in offering. Tears continued to slide down her cheeks, though she'd stopped trying to hide them. "I have 3 children, Rashid found himself saying. "Do you know what they'd have done in this situation?" His voice roughened with emotion he'd suppressed for years. "They'd have blamed me for my clumsiness. Demanded I replace the rug with something more modern. Suggested I was too old to be living alone in such a large house, that I should sign assets over to them for better management. They certainly wouldn't have offered me anything they valued. They've never offered me anything but expenses and disappointments." Amara stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected confession. "But you," Rashid continued, looking at Layla, "you offered me your most precious possession. Not because it would actually help. Not because you thought I'd accept it. But because it was all you had, and you believed the gesture mattered more than the value." He knelt slowly, his old knees protesting, bringing himself to Layla's eye level. Up close, he could see that her eyes, those remarkable, expressive eyes, held something he'd forgotten existed, pure, uncalculated compassion. "I've spent my life believing that everyone wanted something from me," Rashid said softly. "That kindness was always a transaction, generosity always an investment with expected returns. You've shown me I was wrong. At least about some people." "I don't understand," Layla whispered. "Neither do I," Rashid admitted. "Not yet." He reached out, gently closing her fingers around the locket. "But I intend to. Keep this. Treasure it. And perhaps—" He paused, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. "Hope, maybe, or the ghost of it. Perhaps you might teach an old man that the world isn't as dark as he thought it was." He stood, his movements stiff, and addressed Amara. "I apologize for the deception. It was cruel and unnecessary. You will both stay for dinner tonight. I insist." "Sir, we couldn't," Amara began. "You can and you will." The command in his voice returned, but softened somehow. "Consider it compensation for emotional distress." For the first time in 3 days, something like a smile tried to form on Rashid's lips. It felt foreign and used, like a muscle that had atrophied from lack of use. As mother and daughter exchanged bewildered glances, Rashid turned and walked back toward his study, his mind churning with thoughts that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. What if I've wasted my entire life being wrong about people? What if cynicism wasn't wisdom but cowardice? He stopped at the study doorway, looking back at Layla, who still clutched her grandmother's locket, watching him with those impossibly kind eyes. What if there's still time to change? The wall around his heart, that fortress he'd spent decades constructing, didn't just crack anymore. It began, slowly and painfully, to crumble. The dinner that evening was awkward at first, 3 people unused to sharing meals, sitting at opposite ends of a table designed for 20 guests. But by dessert, something remarkable happened. Rashid laughed. A genuine, unguarded sound that surprised even him. Layla had been telling a story about a stray cat at her school, mimicking its indignant meows with such accuracy that even Amara smiled despite her lingering nervousness. And Rashid, 72 years old and certain he'd forgotten how, laughed. That night marked a beginning. Over the following weeks, Rashid made a decision that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. He invited Layla to use his library. The vast room on the mansion's second floor, lined with thousands of books collected over a lifetime, had sat largely unused for years. Now it became Layla's sanctuary. She came 3 times a week after school, her worn backpack replaced by a leather satchel Rashid had quietly purchased. She'd curl up in the window seat overlooking the gardens, reading everything from classic literature to philosophy texts far beyond her grade level. Rashid would sit in his armchair, ostensibly reviewing business documents, but often found himself watching her instead, the way she'd furrow her brow in concentration, the way she'd mouth difficult words to herself, the way she'd look up with questions that revealed a mind hungry for understanding. "Why do people hurt each other when kindness costs nothing?" she asked one afternoon, looking up from a history book about ancient conflicts. Rashid set down his papers. No one had asked him such questions in decades. His business associates dealt in profits and losses, his children in demands and complaints. But Layla asked about humanity, about meaning, about truth. "I don't know," he admitted. "I spent most of my life believing it was because everyone wanted something, and kindness was weakness. But you've shown me I was wrong." "I didn't show you anything," Layla protested. "I just did what felt right." "Exactly." Rashid smiled, a gesture that came more easily now. "You did what felt right without calculating the cost or benefit. That's rarer than you know." Their conversations deepened over months, then years. Rashid began including Layla in his charitable work, reviewing grant applications for his foundation, visiting the schools and hospitals his wealth supported, discussing which causes deserved funding. She had an instinct for identifying genuine need versus opportunistic requests, a talent honed by her own experience with poverty. Amara, initially uncertain about this arrangement, gradually relaxed as she saw her daughter blossom. Rashid had quietly tripled her salary and moved them into the mansion's guest house, a cottage on the grounds that was larger than anywhere they'd lived before. For the first time in years, Amara slept without the constant terror of financial collapse. Rashid's own children noticed the changes, of course. They called more frequently, their voices tight with suspicion. "Father, I hear you've taken an interest in the maid's daughter," Samira said during one call, her British accent sharp with barely concealed alarm. "People are talking. Let them talk." Rashid felt no need to explain himself to a daughter who'd visited twice in 5 years. "But father, the family reputation has survived far worse than kindness." He ended the call before she could respond. Khalil was more direct. "You're not actually giving money to that girl, are you? Father, if you're becoming senile, we should discuss power of attorney." "I'm not senile. I'm finally seeing clearly." Rashid hung up on his son for the first time in his life. Their protests only confirmed what he'd come to understand. His biological children saw him as a resource to be managed, not a person to be loved. Layla saw him as someone worth caring about, someone whose stories and wisdom had value beyond his bank balance. The years passed. Layla grew from a curious 10-year-old into a thoughtful teenager, then a poised young woman. She attended university on a scholarship Rashid arranged through his foundation. He insisted she earn it on merit, and she did, graduating top of her class in international development and nonprofit management. By the time she turned 20, Layla had become indispensable to Rashid's charitable operations. She managed 3 foundation branches, reviewed funding proposals with an analyst's precision and a humanitarian's heart, and brought a perspective Rashid's wealthy board members lacked. She remembered what it was like to count pennies, to watch her mother skip meals so her daughter could eat, to understand that poverty wasn't a moral failing but a circumstance that could crush even the worthiest souls. Amara, now in her mid-40s, had become the foundation's operations director, bringing the same meticulous attention to charitable work that she'd once applied to cleaning Rashid's mansion. The guest house remained their official residence, though they spent most evenings in the main house, sharing meals with Rashid, discussing projects and plans and dreams. The mansion, once a mausoleum of silence, filled with life. With purpose. Rashid, now 82, felt something he'd never expected to feel again: contentment. His health was failing. He knew this, accepted it, but his heart, that organ he'd thought permanently calcified, had somehow learned to feel again. The end came on a spring afternoon, gentle and unhurried. Rashid sat in his study armchair, the same chair where he'd pretended to sleep a decade earlier, reviewing documents Layla had prepared for a new educational initiative in underprivileged communities. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and golden, nothing like the storm that had raged during their first encounter. He felt tired, more tired than usual. His chest ached with a heaviness that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with a heart that had beaten for 8 decades and was ready to rest. Layla was downstairs, meeting with architects about converting the East Wing into a community center. He could hear her voice drifting up, confident, articulate, compassionate. Everything he'd once been before cynicism had poisoned him. Everything he'd learned to be again through her example. Rashid smiled. He thought about his life, the successes and failures, the wealth accumulated and relationships destroyed, the years wasted on suspicion and the decade redeemed by trust. He thought about that stormy afternoon when a small girl had draped her worn jacket over his knees, and how that single gesture had changed everything. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of his younger self, to the universe that had given him a second chance he hadn't deserved. "Thank you for showing me I was wrong." His eyes closed. The documents slipped from his fingers. When Layla found him an hour later, he looked peaceful. His face, so often tight with suspicion in earlier years, held a gentle smile. She knelt beside the chair, taking his frail hand in hers, and wept, not for his wealth or what his death might mean for her future, but for the man himself, the grandfather in spirit if not in blood, who taught her that even the most damaged hearts could heal. 2 weeks later, the reading of the will took place in the oak-paneled conference room of Rashid's attorney, Marcus Chin. Present were Rashid's 3 biological children, Samira, Khalil, and his younger son Tariq, who'd flown in from New York, along with Layla, Amara, and various board members of Rashid's companies. Samira sat at the head of the table with the proprietary air of someone already calculating square footage and liquidation values. Khalil reviewed something on his phone, confident in his inheritance. Tariq, the youngest at 35, looked bored. Layla and Amara sat near the back, uncertain why they'd been summoned. The mansion would be sold, surely, and they'd need to find new positions. Layla had already begun updating her resume, determined to continue charitable work somehow, somewhere. Marcus Chin, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd handled Rashid's legal affairs for 20 years, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Rashid Al-Mansour, updated 6 months before his death and of sound mind and body at the time of execution." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Mr. Al-Mansour left very specific instructions about how this reading should proceed. "I ask that everyone remain seated until I've finished, regardless of their reactions." Samira smiled confidently. Khalil finally looked up from his phone. Marcus began reading. "To my children, Samira, Khalil, and Tariq, I leave the trust funds established at your births, currently valued at approximately $5 million each. These funds will continue to provide quarterly disbursements as previously outlined." Samira's smile froze. "Wait, what about?" "Please remain seated," Marcus said firmly, then continued. "These trust funds represent the totality of inheritance my biological children will receive. I make this decision not from spite, but from clarity." Khalil stood abruptly, his face reddening. "This is insane." He was senile. "We'll contest." Mr. Al-Mansour anticipated this reaction. Marcus interrupted, his voice cooling. "I have here documentation from 3 independent physicians confirming his mental competence at the time this will was executed. Furthermore, he recorded a video statement explaining his reasoning. I'm authorized to show it now." A screen descended from the ceiling. After a moment, Rashid appeared, filmed in his study, wearing his customary dark suit, looking directly at the camera with sharp, clear eyes. "Samira, Khalil, Tariq." His recorded voice filled the room. "If you're watching this, I'm dead, and you're angry. I understand. You expected the bulk of my fortune. The mansion, the businesses, the billions I accumulated over a lifetime. You expected it because you're my blood, and in your minds, blood entitles you to wealth you didn't earn. Rashid's image paused as if gathering thoughts. But I learned something in my final years. Blood means nothing compared to character. You visited me twice a year, and only when you needed money. You never asked how I was, never cared about my loneliness, never demonstrated an ounce of genuine affection. You saw me as a bank, not a father. Samira's face had gone white. Tariq stared at the screen in shock. 10 years ago, a 10-year-old girl showed me more kindness in 5 minutes than you 3 demonstrated in 40 years, Rashid continued. She covered me with her jacket when she thought I was cold. She offered me her most precious possession to protect her mother from consequences that weren't her fault. And over the following decade, she showed me that integrity, compassion, and genuine care exist in this world. I'd just been looking in the wrong places. The recording Rashid leaned forward slightly. I leave you your trust funds because I'm not cruel. $5 million each is more than most people see in a lifetime. Use it wisely or waste it. The choice is yours. But the rest, everything I built, everything I am, goes to someone who understands that wealth is a responsibility, not an entitlement. The screen went dark. Silence filled the conference room. Marcus Chen looked down at the will. To Layla Hassan, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate. This includes the Al Mansour mansion and all its contents, controlling interest in Al Mansour Holdings and its subsidiary companies, all investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and liquid assets. Current estimated value, $4.3 billion. Layla gasped audibly. Amara gripped her daughter's hand, her own hand trembling. Additionally, Marcus continued, I leave to Layla 2 specific items of sentimental value, the pink diamond pendant that sat on my desk 10 years ago, and the silver locket that belonged to her grandmother, which she once offered me in a gesture of selfless sacrifice. These items, though valuable, are meant to remind her that true wealth is measured in character, not currency. The attorney looked up from the document. There are, of course, conditions. Layla must use at least 60% of the fortune's annual returns for charitable purposes, continue the foundation's work, and maintain the estate not as a personal residence but as a center for community benefit. She has the option to live there, but the mansion must serve a greater purpose. He set down the papers. Mr. Al Mansour believed Layla would accept these conditions without hesitation. Was he correct? Layla sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. She looked at her mother, who nodded through her own tears, then at the attorney. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course. I'll honor his wishes. All of them. This is absurd. Khalil exploded, finally finding his voice. She's not even family. She manipulated a senile old man into. My father was sharper in his final years than in his prime, Marcus cut him off coldly. And I would be very careful about making accusations you cannot prove. Mr. Al Mansour included provisions for dealing with anyone who contests this will or harasses Ms. Hassan. Those provisions are unpleasant. Samira stood, her composure cracking. You won't get away with this. We have lawyers. We have. $5 million each, Marcus reminded her. Most people would be grateful. The question is whether you'll accept your father's final lesson about gratitude and perspective, or prove him right about your character. One by one, Rashid's biological children left the conference room, their fury palpable. The door slammed behind them with finality. In the silence that followed, Layla looked at Marcus Chen with wide, overwhelmed eyes. I don't understand. I didn't do anything special. You were kind, Marcus said gently. In a life full of people who wanted things from him, you simply cared about him. You have no idea how rare that is. He smiled slightly. Your first board meeting is next Tuesday. I suggest you prepare. You're about to become one of the youngest philanthropists in the country. 10 years later, the mansion looked different now. Still grand, still beautiful, but warm in a way it had never been during Rashid's early years. The East Wing had been converted into a community center, offering after-school programs, adult education classes, and job training. The gardens hosted weekend farmers markets where local artisans sold their goods. The study where Rashid had once sat in bitter isolation now served as Layla's office, though she'd added comfortable furniture and removed the heaviest curtains, letting natural light flood the space. The leather armchair, Rashid's chair, remained, a memorial to the man who'd taught her that even the hardest hearts could soften. At 30, Layla had transformed the Al Mansour fortune into a force for genuine change. Schools in underprivileged neighborhoods, health clinics in underserved communities, microloans for women entrepreneurs, scholarships for students who reminded her of her younger self. The foundation's reach extended across continents. Amara, now in her 50s and officially retired from active management, still visited the foundation offices daily, unable to fully step away from work that had given her life purpose beyond survival. They stood together in the study one evening, reviewing applications for a new mentorship program. The pink diamond pendant hung around Layla's neck, not as jewelry, but as a reminder. Her grandmother's locket sat in a glass case on the desk beside a photograph of Rashid, taken during his final year, showing a rare, genuine smile. "Do you think he'd be proud?" Layla asked, looking at the photograph. Amara touched her daughter's shoulder. "I think he knew exactly what you'd become. That's why he chose you." "I still miss him," Layla admitted. "Even after all these years." "Good," Amara said softly. "Missing him means he mattered. That's the greatest legacy anyone can leave." Through the study windows, visible in the golden light of early evening, children played in the mansion's gardens. Children from the community center's after-school program, their laughter rising like music. The mansion, once a fortress of silence, now rang with life and possibility. Layla touched the locket through her shirt, feeling its familiar weight, then looked at the photograph of Rashid. "I'll keep my promise," she whispered. "Kindness is an investment that never fails. You taught me that." Somewhere, perhaps, a bitter old man who'd learned to hope again smiled. The sun set over the Al Mansour estate, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Inside and outside, in every corner transformed by Layla's vision, Rashid's true legacy lived on, not in the wealth he'd accumulated, but in the compassion he'd learned to embrace and the generosity he'd learned to practice. He'd spent 50 years believing that everyone wanted something from him. In the end, he'd discovered that the people worth trusting were those who wanted nothing at all, except to care. And that lesson, passed from a cynic to a child and from a child to the world, proved more valuable than all his billions combined. True wealth is measured not in what you accumulate, but in what you give. Kindness compounds infinitely, paying dividends that transcend currency. And legacy, real legacy, is shaped not by blood or money, but by the integrity of our actions and the depth of our compassion. In the end, the richest person is not the one who dies with the most, but the one who lived with meaning and loved without calculation. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.